Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're sorry about the interruption a little while ago. We hope it won't happen again. But once again, I am very happy to introduce to you our guest speaker tonight, our industry expert, Arnie Gundersen of Fairwinds Energy Associates. Arnie, take it away.
Hey, thanks again, Dave. And thank you to NEIS. I learned a lot in these from other experts, and I hope you all learn something from me. And also another shout out to Fairwinds. You know, Anderson Cooper is like the talking head that people think of is CNN, but in fact, there's a lot behind that person, and there's a lot behind me. I mean, Maggie set up a Fairwinds site and organization that's pretty damn phenomenal. So a shout out to Fairwinds and to NEIS. Topic tonight is decommissioned is not the same as decontaminated. Now, and this is a big deal now is, you know, there's 100 plants and their average age is over 40 and they're only designed for 40. So we're coming into an era where more plants will be dying than starting up for sure. So it's important to understand what it means when a plant is decommissioned. Yeah, I think it's a Navy term, and it comes from a ship being commissioned, and then when it's no longer functioning, it is decommissioned. Technically, it's awfully similar to dismantling an old factory. Factories, though, have no radiation, and hence, when you knock them down, you can actually sell the steel. It's also a little bit similar to a building that's been contaminated with PCBs or asbestos, in which case you may not be able to sell the material, and in which case the owners frequently abandon those facilities. So what the NRC did was the last thing they want is an abandoned nuclear plant in your backyard or in your state. An example of abandonment and what it means is there's a whole bunch of abandoned facilities out at the Hanford site, and animals get in and they get out, and particularly rabbits, it turns out, and the rabbits leave their rabbit droppings all through the surrounding areas, which are radioactive because they've been in these facilities. They're so radioactive, they pick them up in a Geiger counter from a helicopter, and then they send plant people out to kill the rabbits. It's called bunny money. These guys are paid to hunt rabbits because the last thing they want is a civilian catching and eating a radioactive rabbit. So you don't want an abandoned facility. To avoid abandonment, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has established a requirement for a decommissioning trust fund. The key is trust. We, over the course of the 40-year life of a plant, we set money aside out of our bill that's put into a trust fund solely to dismantle the nuke. Can't be used for anything else. And gradually over 40 years, it builds up. And after 40 years, it can be somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. So it's a lot of money. Now, the title is decommissioned doesn't mean decontaminated. And in the public's eye, when people think that a plant is decommissioned, they think the site is clean. In fact, that's not a requirement of law. And in fact, it never ever happens. The site is still radioactive. By law, the NRC says a site is acceptable for the public to use if the radiation level is 25 millirem higher than what it was when the plant started. A millirem is a measure of radiation. Normal sites are around 100 millirem before the plant ever gets built. So essentially, they're saying the plant can have made the land, the remaining land, 25% more radioactive, and it's still acceptable for public use. And the other thing the NRC does, and this will be important a little bit later, The NRC says you don't have to remove foundations below 3 feet. Now, some of these foundations these are massive buildings, and the foundations go down 60, 70 feet. But the NRC considers a dismantlement to be structurally anything from 3 feet down in the ground up into the sky. So we think, as civilians, we think that the goal of decommissioning is to eliminate the radiation. But the NRC and the owners see decommissioning as a way to eliminate their liability. Once the site is cleared for public access, the owner has no more liability. So it's to the owner's advantage to get the NRC to sign off and declare the site clean enough. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. The NRC guidelines, and there's a lot of them, and how to sample, they're not really designed to find residual contamination, but they're really designed to relatively quickly eliminate the liability on the owners. And I'll talk about that issue of finding residual contamination as this goes on. I need to speak briefly, though, about radiation, because it's what makes a nuclear plant different than knocking apart a factory down the street. So I'm going to get a little geeky here. Nuclear fission is a really big atom, uranium, that splits in half, gives a lot of power, heat off, and these pieces left behind, this radioactive rubble, remain radioactive, in some cases for decades, centuries, or millennia. So what does it mean that this stuff is radioactive? It means it decays. What does decay mean? Decay means that one of these atoms shoots out a radioactive bullet, and it becomes a different atom when it shoots out that bullet. The radioactive bullets there's 3 types. There's a gamma ray. Sometimes a piece of rubble will shoot out a gamma ray, and a gamma ray is very powerful and travels through a human body and out the other side, quite similar to an X-ray, maybe a little more energetic than an X-ray. But the other 2 things that can come out of that rubble are beta particles and alpha particles. They are not as energetic and in fact won't penetrate the skin. But if you imbibe them, either inhale them or they come into a cut, or you swallow them, then they're extraordinarily dangerous because they butt up against the DNA molecule or any molecule, and they just pound away over time, not moving, pounding away over time to cause either a necrosis or a cancer. So the 3 types of radioactive bullets are gamma, alpha, and beta. So in a nuclear reactor's nuclear fuel, when it fissions, the nuclear fuel is supposed to be trapped inside the fuel rods, but the fuel rods break or the fuel rods leak, so that that radioactive rubble enters the water. So the water in the reactor now becomes radioactive as well, and pipes leak. Valves leak, pumps leak, pipes leak. So that radioactive water then leaves that and winds up on the floor of the facility or in the air on the facility. The airborne radioactivity gets sucked out through vents and deposited outside the plant. The stuff that falls on the floor is a little more interesting. The plant will try to clean it up with essentially mops, but like a beet stain on a concrete floor. If you can imagine, that red never really comes out. So what they do is they paint it over, and that's called fixing it. They apply a coating on top of it so it doesn't come out. It's extraordinarily common in nuclear plants, and some plants, some components will have leaked repeatedly. So there will be many coats of paint over many, many layers of radiation to fix it, to protect the the people. So that's what's going on inside a nuclear power plant. Now, I want to talk for 1 second, though, about this penetration of the radioactivity. I brought along my my trusty Geiger counter from International Medcom, our friends in California. I love those guys, and you might be able to hear it clicking every once in a while. Right now in South Carolina, this number up here, the background radiation, is around 30. It'll go up, go down, mainly from cosmic rays and radioactive decay, normally occurring radioactive decay in the soil. So that's normal background. Now over here, I've got a yellow frog. Say hello, frog. Okay, now this color in this frog comes from uranium. And it was very common that figurines would be made of this color in glass in the 1930s, 20s. The process even dates back until the middle of the 1800s. So this is a glass that contains uranium, and that's where they chose uranium to get that color. Now, I'm going to put that frog up against the detector on the back of my radiation detector now. Watch the screen. I don't know if you can hear it beeping, but remember this thing started at 30. Now, each one of those is a radioactive bullet that's leaving that frog and hitting the Geiger counter on the back of my radiation detector. The radiation here is from that frog is essentially 100 times more radioactive than the background in this in South Carolina. Now I'm going to let the radiation detector cool down for about a minute. It takes that much time for the second part of this example. Uranium emits an alpha particle, which doesn't travel far, but when it's inside your body, it's like putting a howitzer up against the cell. And plutonium emits alpha particles. Uranium emits, thorium emits it. So that they can cause immense cellular damage when they're inside your body. Okay, my detector slowed down. So now I've got a book. It happens to be Physics Without Math, which is sort of what we're doing tonight. And I'm going to put the frog on one side, and I'm going to put the radiation detector on the other. Frog, radiation detector. Nothing's happening, right? That's because that much material is enough to stop the alpha particles from this frog. Now that's really important later on when we get into this conversation about detecting radiation when it's in the soil. All right. So when a nuke shuts down forever, like Palisades or like San Onofre or my Yankee or Indian Point, the fuel is radioactive. The core, the vessel that holds the uranium is radioactive. The pipes are radioactive. The building itself is contaminated and radioactive, and likely the grounds outside are also contaminated. So at that point, once the plant is permanently closed, cleanup ensues. So the goal is, the company's goal is to eliminate that facility as quickly as possible with as little money as possible. And our goal is to eliminate that facility, but make sure that there's no residual radiation as well. Now, there's several problems that happen in that process. One of which is when you're in a power plant, the facility itself is radioactive. so that there's a background of radiation. And frequently when an employee goes into a facility and he measures a radioactive component, it will be radioactive, but it's below background. So he will think it's not radioactive. Now, this happened a lot at the Santa Susana out in California, where the plant was being dismantled, but the spot where they dragged the concrete to make sure that it was that it could be dumped in a local dump was quite radioactive. So the normal background in that area was quite high. When employees brought in the radioactive concrete, it was radioactive, but it was less than the background. So the background radiation masked what the radiation in the concrete was, and they shipped it into local landfills. So that's one problem that can occur in a nuclear plant. And it did happen at the Santa Susana facility in California. The second issue is that trained professionals can be trained and can deliberately not examine areas that are contaminated. An example I ran into there was a school near the Piketon nuclear facility. Experts hired by the public went in and found radiation. Then the Department of Energy came in and they didn't find any. Well, what did the Department of Energy do? They measured the tops of the desks. Well, what do the janitors do in a school? They clean the tops of the desks. So these desks had probably been cleaned, I don't know, thousands of times. And then when the Department of Energy swiped the top of the desk, they found no radiation. So it's not that the radiation wasn't there, but they weren't looking in the right place. The experts for the public found it on the bottom of the desk, on the kids' shoelaces, on the floor, in the ventilation. But the Department of Energy didn't look there. They knew where to look, where it would not be found. So experts hired by the people that own the facility can look in the wrong places and miss the radiation. It happens. The next thing is, and this gets back to that example of my frog, is that nobody knows what's underground. I was on the Vermont Yankee Oversight Committee, and Entergy told us that there were no pipes underground that contained radioactive material. Well, one broke, and there was a significant contamination of the groundwater. And while they were at it, the panel I was on said, "How do you know that's the only one? You did tell us there was none, and now suddenly there's one, and that one happens to be leaking. How do you know it's the only one?" And they went back and they found 41 other underground radioactive pipes that they didn't know about. So if you're trying to clean up a facility and you only have to decontaminate down to 3 feet, and the radiation is shielded by an inch or two of dirt, it's very likely you're going to wind up with radiation inside, under the soil, that then can get torn up when the next owner takes it. Another example, I was on the radiation safety committee of a licensee that our job was to dismantle nuclear plants. And we had a nuclear facility out in Ohio that was owned by General Electric, and it was producing thorium for jet engine turbine blades. And they wanted to eliminate their license, and we went in and we cleaned the plant. We were quite certain it was clean. And we were ready to invite the NRC in to do a site inspection and then release the site. So the site release was the next step. Well, as the bulldozers were driving off the site, one of them collapsed into a cistern that was loaded with radioactive thorium. We didn't find it in our site survey because it was below a couple inches of dirt. It was below a couple feet of dirt, but and the drawings didn't show it. So there is a risk on any of these plants that there's a significant liability for items that simply are not on the drawings that and are so deep in the ground that they're not detectable. And the last piece of the cleanup that frightens me, perhaps even the most, is that the owner's lab may not be truthful, and the state labs may also not be truthful. Back in 1977, the St. Lucie site, which is in Florida, misplumbed its radioactive waste and sent it into the sanitary sewer waste. So for 5 years, until they found this out, they were shipping their sanitary sewer waste off-site, spreading it on farmers' fields, and shipping it to the local sewage treatment facility. Now, it was discovered by helicopter at 1,000 feet. The radiation levels were 10 times higher than normal background over the particular farmer's field. Now, as you might expect, the NRC gets in and the owner gets in and says, no problem, nobody's at risk. They then did site surveys and they sent the samples to a state lab. The state lab did not keep the samples in the radiation detector long enough, and they completely missed all the radiation because it was building up over a period of time. They should have kept it in an hour. They kept it in for 10 minutes. And the net effect was the state lab said the site was good to go. It was clean, when in fact it remained loaded with radioactivity. That was in 82. The NRC also required that the owner go to the sewage treatment plant and do a full survey there. In 2000, 39 kids had neuroblastomas that the state of Florida said were statistically meaningful. And but they couldn't understand how these rare 1 in a million neuroblastomas could occur. In fact, through bringing in independent experts, we traced it back to the leak at St. Lucie. But the NRC never, it demanded that the waste facility be examined. When it wasn't, they missed it. So for 30 or 40 years, this facility has been discharging contaminated waste, and the NRC simply missed it. So, my suggestion is you can't count on the NRC, you can't count on the owner as a profit motive, and you can't count on the state labs either. One last thing on the state, if you look at what's going on out at Palisades in Michigan now, where the state is actively trying to get Palisades to run again, that's another example of a Tweedledee Tweedledum relationship between the owner and the state. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about best practices now, for the citizens groups that are on the line. And I guess this sucker is still beeping. And when you have hearing aids, you miss those little beeps. There's several things that citizens groups can do to avoid some of these of the issues that have been encountered around the country. The first thing is to get the utility under oath to commit to clean up the facility if they run out of money. Now, what's happened is that these things, each nuclear plant, for instance, Entergy's had a dozen nuclear plants, each one of which was a limited liability corporation. And what that means is that if Indian Point 2 releases an enormous amount of radiation and is found liable for billions, it's a limited liability corporation, so they can shut it off and it doesn't affect the remaining plants. So when I was in Japan, I learned that Japanese have a great word for limited liability corporations. And it translates to the lizard loses its tail. So you take the tail, but the lizard gets away. That's very similar to what happens with these limited liability corporations. So first, as citizens, we should get the owner, the person that created the mess, to commit to cleaning it up on their own dime if the decommissioning fund is depleted. The second thing is the big deal thing right now is that they are planning on having citizen advisory boards. That's lipstick on a pig. The boards have no authority and no money. So what happens is, let's look at Vermont Yankee, which I'm familiar with, although they have another one out in Michigan at Palisades, and I'm sure elsewhere. These local citizens with no real nuclear knowledge sit down once a month and they're briefed by the owner of the facility or they're briefed by the NRC. But they don't have the expertise to ask good questions, and they don't have the money to hire an independent expert. So, number two is make sure that the citizen advisory boards have a budget and access to independent experts. The budget can come out of the decommissioning fund. That would be an allowable expenditure. The third thing, and the only state in the union that's done this is Vermont, is get a monthly printout of expenditures. Every month I get an email from the state saying this month Holtec, the decommissioning contractor, spent X thousands of dollars on dismantling, millions of dollars, and there's this much remaining in the fund. So you can track how the funds are being used. Two more things. I found this especially at Indian Point and up in Michigan. Well, actually, at Zion too. I mean, Zion is a great example of this. The mayors in the town and the politicians believe that the site will be a valuable asset afterward. Now, that's not a given, especially considering that the contamination can exist immediately below the soil. So I think it's imperative upon us to let the politicians know at the state level and at the local level that this site may not be usable afterward, and nobody's on the hook. Once the NRC has released that site, the owner is gone. So it's really important to talk to the politicians that they're not getting an asset that they can use to develop high-rise condominiums or whatever. There is a risk that when the next guy starts putting pilings in the ground, that those pilings are going to come up with radioactive contamination. The next person who drives those pilings doesn't have to look for the contamination. The NRC doesn't require, when the site is disturbed after release, that people look. So it's important to let the political and development officers know that there's a hidden time bomb underground there, and that there is a risk that can be mitigated if you do the job right in the first place. So something happened though back with Zion. Zion was the first plant to have this happen to. Prior to Zion, the owner of the plant retained the decommissioning trust fund, hired a contractor, and then doled out money to the contractor. And at the end, shook the contractor's hand and thanked him. And the NRC released the owner of that facility from any future liabilities. That's the way it used to work. With Zion, the game changed, and it's a dramatic change, and a lot of us were against it. what happened at Zion was that another company called Zion Solutions came along and bought the plant and the decommissioning fund, and they formed a limited liability corporation. So they have an asset, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they've got a liability of a plant. Now, their deal with the previous owner was, if they get this thing done quickly and efficiently, they get to keep what's left. So there's an enormous motivation to cut corners. Now, now we're finding particles remaining at Zion. That doesn't surprise me. And Zion was a relatively clean site compared to like Vermont Yankee or Indian Point. So the concept of turning over the asset to a decommissioning contractor and giving them free rein, but also free access to this huge pot of gold is dangerous, because it eliminates any oversight that to prevent cutting corners. Now they'll say, well, we work under strict NRC regulation. There's no NRC inspector on site, and they are responsible. The owner, the decommissioning contractor, limited liability corporation, is responsible for self-identifying when it breaks the law. That's not a good recipe for a successful cleanup. Their goal is to get it done quickly and cheaply. Our goal is to get it done well and as clean as possible. That concept has also, not only Zion was the first, but on top of that, now we've got Indian Point 2 and 3 being bought by Holtec. Vermont Yankee was bought by North Star. Palisades was bought by Holtec. And when you're a limited liability corporation, when you've spent all the money in the pot, if you find contamination you hadn't counted on and you've spent all the money in the pot, what do? If you abandon the plant. And I've questioned the NRC on this in a public hearing in Vermont. And they said, well, if that happens, we'll go after the previous owner, the utility. But that's not how limited liability law works. You know, the transfer is complete, and Holtec or Zion Solutions takes the money, spends it as they see fit, and moves on. That's a game changer that I think we need to think about when you're encountering these people. All right, I've talked way too long, and we were interrupted there, but Dave, back to you.
Thank you, Arnie, for sharing amazing experiences and some good advice. I've noticed a couple of our board members have joined us in the meantime, so I'm going to take a moment to introduce them, and then I'll turn it over to Jan Boudart, who will give the instructions for the Q&A. So first of all, I would ask Linda Lewison to come off mute and say hello to the audience tonight.
Hi, thanks, Arnie. That made a lot of things really clear that needed to.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Welcome. And Stephanie Belenko has joined us. She's a member of the board. Say hello.
Thank you so much, Arnie. That was really a wow. I mean, I've been associated with NEIS for a while, but had no idea of all that was involved with decommissioning. So a huge thank you.
Okay. So now I will turn it over to Jan Boudart, who will give you instructions for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Dave. And so I've got these instructions all written out, and but I do want to say I thought this talk by Arnie was extremely interesting and brought out a lot of points about decommissioning that we didn't know before. And I think we still need to talk about what's left and what you found in Tokyo and things like that. So I hope we can bring those things out in the Q&A. Okay, so when a person asks a question, Each person will get one follow-up after their question is answered, but not two, because it's entirely possible to completely absorb the speaker with a curious person. And we love your curiosity, but other people need a chance. The second one is if you are making a comment or a long question, or you don't need feedback from the speaker, your comment may not be more than 3 minutes. And I have my trusty little cell phone with its timer. And please do not ask in a series of questions at once. Ask one question. Try to prioritize your question so that you can put the most important one. And then if we have a second round, which is very possible, then you can ask your second question. Now, to ask a question, you can go to the chat and say stack, S-T-A-C-K. And we're watching this chat as best we can, but the best way is to raise your hand from the icon at the bottom of the screen. Going down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see one of the icons down there says reactions. So if you click on reactions, there will be a bar come up that says, what does it say? It says raise hand. And so if you do that, I'll do that right now, and you can see my hand is raised, and I'm up at the top of the screen so that it's really obvious I'm the person who has to watch this. I'm sure I can see that. Oh, I can't make it go down. Oh, there we are. And then I have just one more little thing here, I think. Oh, you'll get a second chance to speak. We already mentioned that if it is not before 1/2 and no one else has their hand raised. So 1/2 is going to be 8:30 Central Time. It'll be 8:30 Central Time, 9:30 Eastern, and 10:30 Atlantic. And I think we have one person here from that time zone. So let's get going, and Dave also watches the chat. So first we're going to call on Carolyn Treadway and then Linda Lewison. So go ahead, Carolyn, unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Jan. I'm very interested to know about what is happening at Fukushima. I have been there twice, but the last time was 2014, after the disasters. And I was horrified to learn recently that they're giving tours of the reactors there, that are falling apart reactors. And I tried to convince a friend not to go because it was radioactive, but I don't think she listened to me. So can you say what the decommissioning danger status is there now around the Fukushima Daiichi?
Well, yeah, I've been there 4 times, and the last was 2017 on a field survey that Maggie funded. And it's interesting because in 2012, I had a best-selling book in Japan, and I said it was going to take 100 years to dismantle the facility, and it was going to cost in excess of $500 billion. Of course, Tokyo Electric poo-pooed that idea and attacked my credibility. And they said it would cost $10 billion and be done in 5 or 6 years. Well, now here we are out at 12 years, and they haven't even found the nuclear core yet. You know, the total amount of core that they've been able to analyze is about 1 gram, which is the weight of a dollar bill. And the core actually weighs about 900 tons. So they haven't been able, they don't know where it is and how it's configured. And they are still desperately struggling with, and how are we going to get it out of there? And it's leaking into the groundwater and out into the Pacific, as well as being collected and stored in tanks. They want to dump all the water into the Pacific. Maggie and I and Fairwinds are against that because the water contains tritium and lots of other radioactive material. And there's plenty of room. They say we're running out of room. And you'll see these pictures of many, many tanks, about 1,000 of them, butting up against the property line. But on the other side of the property line is contaminated land owned by somebody else that has no value. So they could just buy the land instead of dump into the Pacific. So Tokyo Electric, I don't know what they have done well.
Much.
And sorry, no, as far as taking tours, the surrounding communities remain quite radioactive, although probably I think it's about 85% of the land now that was contaminated is cleared by the Japanese government to return, but only 5 to 10% of the people that live there have returned, which is exciting that they are not going back. And the 5 or 10% are in general elderly who want to die with their ancestors. Within Japan, there's a lot of the population's declining. There's a lot of areas of Japan that would love to have these evacuees to fill their schools and to move into homes that have been abandoned. But the Japanese government is trying to force people back into Fukushima, which is contaminated. Now, what they did to allow that contamination to occur is they increased the allowable exposure limit tenfold. So it used to be that normal people like you and I could be allowed into an area with 500 millirem. What they did was they said, no, it's now allowable at 5,000 millirem. So even though they claim that these these homes are cleaned up, they're 10 times more radioactive than they were when the people had to abandon them. We still find radioactive hot particles, and that's another discussion. We have a great report out on the two great reports up on the Fairwind site about the spread of radiation. One shows that there's extraordinarily radioactive particles that are far away, 300 miles away. And the other one shows that the alpha and beta particles are not in the same location as the gamma particles. And what that means is there was many more than one plume that left the plant. I could talk for hours about Fukushima, but it's better than it was when it melted down, but they're nowhere. They're not even a tenth of the way into this tunnel yet, let alone seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
And were there cores from all 4 reactors that are missing, or just one, or what?
Oh, just 3. And literally, they have a couple of photographs of the cores when they get a sample in. That the radiations are so high that the robots have broken down, and on and on. So it's and here's the difference. When Chernobyl melted down, the core fell into the basement of the reactor, which is dry, and it formed this thing called the elephant's foot. If you go up on the web and you type in elephant's foot, you can see photographs of the core. Now you can't stand but 5 seconds in front of it to take the photograph and get the hell out. But the core at Chernobyl is dry. The 3 cores at Fukushima are wet. They're in contact with the groundwater. And it's an entirely different problem and much more complicated.
Thank you.
One of the things that Arnie should be telling you about, and I'll jump in and tell you about, is what Fairwinds did, and in large part thanks to some donations that Linda Lewison helped us get and sponsored. Arnie and Marco, Dr. Marco Kaltofen, who we do our science work with, traveled to Japan together in 2017, and they looked at the Olympic torch run area because Japan had guaranteed that whole area was, as Arnie said earlier, cleaned. How do you clean woods? How do you clean mountains?
Right.
You know, so the wind and rain carries any radiation from the mountains and woods down to areas that were already cleaned. The snow melt came down, and
Right.
kids' playgrounds, everything was recontaminated. And Arnie and Marco showed the recontamination in that second peer-reviewed paper that we did. And Linda, thank you so much for helping us do that work by helping Fairwinds do that. Where it's just tragic to see that so many people went there who were athletes, and then they were inhaling and ingesting this if they're running, just like kids ride their bikes in that area, and they're getting exposed all the time. Kids play on the playground, they're getting exposed. And as Mary Olson from GRIP, Gender Radiation Information Project, can tell you that women and children are so much more radiosensitive. And the standard national standards we're all operating under are standards for men, based upon post-World War II numbers. So I really feel sad that we haven't been able to do more. We've done a lot, and we've done 3 peer-reviewed papers on the science that we do, the community volunteer citizen science that samples microparticles of dust and dirt. And we've been able to do that 2 times in Japan over long periods of time, and also in the UK at near Sellafield, that waste dump at Santa Susana Field Lab in California, the site of the Woolsey fire, and that ash, when that fire started on the site and migrated, that ash was transported miles and miles away. And so these particles of radioactivity are anywhere. And we've been, Marco, Arnie, and I worked together to do this, donating our time for a decade. It took us 10 years to solidify the science and have the peer reviewed. And it's that process that shows that these microparticles and nanoparticles of radioactivity cannot be cleaned up, and they'll migrate from all different areas. As Arnie had talked about at different times, I don't remember if he said it today. One of the sites where gophers have gone down and dug up the radiation that's underneath, then brought it up. Arnie, did you bring that up? No, not this time.
At Rocky Flats, the site was declared clean, turned into a public recreation area. And now the gophers are digging their holes and bringing up contamination from below. Yeah. That 2 quick things on Fukushima. I went on top of the Minami Soma town hall. That town had been evacuated and cleaned by TEPCO. The town hall had a new epoxy roof put on. And I went on top of the roof, and there's some dirt lying in the corner, and I pick up the dirt and we take it back for sample. It's highly radioactive. How can that be? This place was cleaned, squeaky clean, paint down, and now on top, it's coming in off the mountains. When we were there in 2017 along the Olympic torch route, the first 30 feet of the side of the road are pretty darn clean. But if you go back 40 feet, it's entirely contaminated. So what they've done is they just clean these little paths where people may walk, but in fact, they're recontaminating all the time. I'm sorry, we're really off on a topic that's not about today, but it's near.
But it may not be about today, but it's about what's facing us as a country and a world with every nuclear site, whether that's a bomb site.
I have to answer my door. Dave, would you mind asking your question now? And I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry.
Not a problem. And actually, my question was more of a process thing. Maggie, I was going to ask if you would put the URL for the Fairwinds website in the chat box. And if there's any
Yes.
contact info, make sure that goes in there too. And for those of you not familiar with our process, we do save the chat and encourage you to do so as well, so that you can have access to the websites, or sometimes people put in reports or other URLs in the chat box, and we share those at the end of the night. So I'm going to defer my question to the end and turn it over to Tina Volas-Bongar, who has a question. Go ahead, Tina. Unmute.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Arnie, as you know, I'm calling from the community of Indian Point here in Peekskill, New York. And my question is about the decommissioning process. We've been told that the site itself in the decommissioning process is going to be characterized in some kind of way by the DEC, which we're seeing, which I'm assuming is just an analysis and an evaluation of what the level of contamination is. These are all assumptions on my part. You just have to understand, everyone, I'm a lay person, and coming from this of just a, from a community perspective. But so I'm wondering if there isn't something that you can say about that process, and anything, just in what you're kind of saying about how the state has done some testing and everything has been really pretty enlightening to me, that is a process that should be watched, correct? So in looking at how the whole entire Indian Point site is going to be characterized and the contamination there, what do you see as the main, major warning there of how to look at it? And again, that's going to be done by the DEC.
Well, it's interesting that they are characterizing the plant now. It's a little bit late, because here the Holtec has the contract to dismantle it, and if they're characterizing it now, they really don't know what they're getting into yet. So I can expect that if they find contamination at this point, then Holtec will sue Entergy, and Entergy will countersue Holtec, and the process could get delayed for a decade by the time that got straightened out. Site characterization sometimes.
But I could be wrong about that. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I could be wrong about that, because I'm assuming that that's what they mean, that maybe some of those tests have been done already, because here we have a decommissioning trust fund of $2.4 billion, right, for the cleanup. So I'm assuming somebody said somewhere, oh, this is how much this is going to cost for us to go in there and look at the contamination and, mitigate some of it, and, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. If that's what they're doing in site characterization, they probably are putting borings down into the soil to determine if radionuclides have gotten down into the groundwater or at the water table or whatever. That's a pretty extensive process, and as the cores are pulled back up, it's likely they'll have some surprises. Remember that the decommissioning is only for Indian Point 2 and 3, and Indian Point 1 is known to have a strontium leak that's heading toward the river. So I can also see people saying, well, that's not our strontium, that's your strontium. That actually happened at Millstone, where there's a goat with radioactive strontium in it. And the people in the community are blaming Millstone, and Millstone is blaming Electric Boat, which makes submarines, and nobody can agree where the strontium is coming from. And I think that can easily happen on the Indian Point site. Luckily, that's a lot of money. Zion was something like 600 million. And it was not much different in size and configuration than Indian Point. It was cleaner though. It didn't run as long, and I spent a lot of time at Zion back in the 90s, and it was a very clean site. But I think I know why Holtec wanted to get in, because at the end, if they get it done for 1.5 billion, they walk away with $1 billion that they don't have to work for. So if this, then there's the issue of how good is the state lab, and are the state's interests aligned with the local community? And again, I think you need that dialogue with your mayor and your local representatives, letting them know that it's not the intent that this site will be squeaky clean. The intent is that below 3 feet, we really don't know what they're leaving behind.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Arnie. Your answers are really interesting. If Stephen and David will forgive me, I'm going to call on Linda because she had her hand up and then she put it down, but now it's back up again. So Linda, please ask your question. Oh, can't hear you, Linda. Well, Linda, oh.
There she is.
No, we can't. I'll call on you later, Linda. Try to fix your microphone. And so we'll call on Stephen Sondheim. Unmute, Steve, and ask your question. Steve fell asleep. Okay, maybe he's, well, okay, David, you go.
Yeah, I'll be sleepwalking here. So Arnie, we all have been around the block with the last 116 reactors and decommissioning and stuff. And we know the horror stories of all that's going on. But as you also know, the Biden administration, the Department of Energy, the nuclear industry is really pushing a next generation of reactors, so-called small modular nuclear reactors. And here in Illinois, you may be aware that they're attempting to repeal our construction moratorium so that they'll have the green light to go ahead and build these. One of the things we had pushed for, even back in the day when it was still Exelon and even Commonwealth Edison running our reactors, was that decommissionings need to be planned before facility closes. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, first of all, not just thoughts about the next generation of reactors and what the decommissioning will entail for them, but also where is the NRC in terms of creating new decommissioning rules for this next generation, since they don't even have proper licensing procedures in place to license these new generations of reactors?
Yeah, there's something is happening in the industry right now. Whereas coal plants retire, people are saying, well, let's replace that coal plant with a small modular reactor. The only asset for a coal plant that's important in the public domain is the transmission line. And those transmission lines have enormous value. Now, I think that activist groups, of which Ferens is not, but activist groups could form alliances with farmers, because farmers could turn their productive farmland into more productive wind turbines and farmland and get lease money on the order of $5,000 or $10,000 per turbine per year to feed into those transmission lines. So I've been advocating to everybody who will listen to me is that I think we need to form alliances with the farmers, because renewables can be extraordinarily lucrative for farmers who are, in pretty desperate straits. Farming is not a high income job, but you have to have the transmission line. So it seems to me like when the utility wants to stick in a small modular reactor in place of a coal plant, first off, there's maybe 5 or 6 years, if we're lucky, that the transmission line's not used. But what they're doing is they're crowding out renewable power by limiting renewables access to the transmission line, saying, well, we're going to need it for our small modular reactor. NRC, so my first point is the transmission is the key. And by claiming that they can replace a coal plant with a small modular reactor, they crowd out renewables, make friends with the farmers. The tax revenues from a wind farm are about the same as the tax revenues from a nuke. So the villages don't lose any tax revenue and the farmers make enormous lease income. So on your other question though about the NRC is bending over backward to minimize to reduce the radiation, the public health standards that small modular reactors have to meet. Ed Lyman can wax eloquently on this for hours. Everything from reducing the emergency planning zone to essentially nothing, to now some reactors are talking about having no operators in the control room. And it would all be done over the internet with some control room in the Philippines or something, I don't know. But they are trying desperately to get the cost of these small modular reactors down, because even though they're small, they're not cheap. So there's all these corners being cut, and the NRC is playing handmaid into it. I don't know a single commissioner who's hearing our side of the argument. Did I answer you, Dave?
Just one other piece though, and that is, do you have any thoughts on the decommissioning of those small modulars at some point in the future?
I think you can let the same rules apply. Of course, you've got to abide by the rules, but the rules as written will work if you abide by them.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Jan.
I just want to tell people that we're going to have an annual meeting on the 11th, and we're going to have a movie about small modular reactors, I do believe. And MV Romana is in the movie. It's called Atomic Bamboozle. So just if you join NEIS and come to our annual meeting for more information. Okay, I think Linda's question. Okay, Linda's question was in the chat, and she said, I heard the funds won't cover the cost of managing high-level radioactive waste. And I think what she wants you to do is comment on that, Arnie.
Yeah, over the decades that nuclear power plants were operating until about a decade ago, 1/10 of a cent was put into a pool for dismantling, for removing and permanently storing the high-level nuclear fuel. That fund is $70 or $80 billion, and nuclear fuel management is not part of what the NRC calls decommissioning. Look in the decommissioning rules that they've written. Once the fuel leaves the reactor, it's not in the trust fund anymore. Getting it out of the reactor is, but moving it to another location or storing it on the site is not. So what happens is that the owners have to sue DOE and get money to finance their storage of nuclear fuel. So with any reactor, Songs is just one of them. The money for the storage of nuclear fuel, in theory, should not be coming out of the trust fund, but should be coming via litigation with the Department of Energy. Now, sometimes, because this costs maybe $100 million to develop a pad to put the stuff on, they'll take it from the decommissioning fund with the expectation that the fund will be paid back after litigation with the DOE. That good, Linda, or down?
That's so complicated. Oh my goodness. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
I am on now. I could not find that damn mute button. Excuse me.
Mhm.
Hey, Arnie. Oh, goodness. You and Maggie are two of the most moral people that I've ever met, and I so appreciate it. I have a slightly different question, if you can comment on it. I saw a presentation by you, and then I've seen a video that shows two things. That if we push as hard as possible on developing new nuclear plants, it won't touch climate change until approximately 2040. And in my interpretation, it'll be 5 or 10% of the greenhouse gases. And that really takes the wind out of the sails if anybody will listen for doing this. And then the other part of it was that it's going to cost so much. And my take on that is it's going to end up costing the consumer utility prices. And right now, they're already hurt. The middle income and the lower income folks are already stretched. And I just think that that's a factor, if taken into account by Congress people, or anyway, it's a serious fact. So can you comment on that? And you've got links to that, I know, but
Yeah.
tell us that. Yes, thank you.
Let me, let's take off the table the fact that there might be a meltdown, or what do we do with the nuclear waste? Forget all that stuff, and just look at the cost and the time to build a new nuke. Now, I gave a speech at McGill University up in Montreal, and it's on the website. And we also have, that's a half an hour speech, or we have a 2-minute animation. So if your attention span is really short, if you go on the Fairwind site, there's a 2-minute animation about, it's called Smokescreen. Both stories are called the CO2 smokescreen. The nukes are hiding behind the CO2 issue in order to build more nukes. The speech at McGill, though, and there's also an article I wrote in Truth Out about this as well, that if in the best case, the World Association of Nuclear Operators, WANO, said that we need 1,000 nukes between now and 2050. That's the big nukes. That's not the baby nukes. That's the big nukes. That would require a nuclear plant to be brought online every 12 days from now until 2050. And the amount of CO2 that would be reduced, total CO2 that's being thrown up into the atmosphere, would be about 6%. So we're spending a lot of money to get an extraordinarily small impact on putting a dent in CO2. And the question is timeliness and expense for what gain? The best, using WANO, World Nuclear Association numbers, and Lazard, which is an investment bank, using their numbers, you show that you spend $11 trillion to reduce carbon by, reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's being thrown into the air by 6%. Now, you look at Mark Jacobson, and Jacobson said we can do it all for 50 trillion. Trillions are lots of money, but Jacobson shows pretty damn clearly that the payback in reduced insurance, but also in no money going to OPEC or any of the other oil providers, it's got a 6-year payback. So a renewable economy is doable. And in fact, it's much cheaper than the nuclear alternative.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I've been pitching that. And I think to some people, that's more important than anything else. It's hard to believe, but the claim now is that we need it, absolutely need it for climate change. And yet the climate change experts say if we don't make significant progress by 2030, it's getting to be too late. And so I'm trying to tell people, even if we did this nuclear thing, it's going to be the mid-2040s and it won't be much of an effect. So trying to take the wind out of the sails of the desperate argument,
Yeah.
which just isn't true.
Hey, Steve, remember, I was on the other side of this argument in the 70s, and nobody was talking about nuclear power and CO2. It was all about energy shortage, gas lines and stuff like that. But this generation of nukes that we have now, the 400 around the world, were not built to mitigate CO2. It was about an energy crisis, which failed to develop. Now, nukes have wrapped themselves, even the ones that are operating now in Illinois, are saying, well, you need us for CO2. They weren't built for that. And in fact, Amory Lovins has done a lot of work that shows the operating cost of a nuke. Forget building a new one, but just funding a plant in Illinois that's already running would be better spent on buying wind turbines that would be cheaper and better for the consumer and reduce CO2 even more if we spent just the operating, the cost of maintenance, the salaries, et cetera. If that money got diverted and we never ever included any of the capital expenditures, it's difficult to make that argument. And I'm terribly upset with the Biden administration on this. They have the brain trust that knows this, Bloomberg and on and on. There's a lot of people there who understand that reactors are not the way to go, but yet you still have the Department of Energy pushing small modulars. Maybe they think they're going to throw some money at that segment and shut them up while we move forward with wind turbines. I don't know why they do it though.
Thank you.
And I wanted to emphasize the idea that Arnie used to be on the opposite side of this argument. We were at a meeting or at a gathering, and he was explaining this, and one of the people there sat down by him and said, "You've come a long way, baby." Yeah, Kathy Silver, I thought that was just kind of fun. Okay, we're gonna call on Joan Seaman. Go ahead, Joan.
Hi, I'm kind of a victim of Rocky Flats and having to learn about it and research it. And I did that as a younger woman, and now I'm an old woman. But I'm kind of surprised because I've been looking at the issue and helping the community in Pueblo, Colorado. And we had the Department of Energy here. It was a sneaky community invite only with the high rollers in Pueblo to come to a meeting, town hall meeting. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I knew nothing about tritium. And just recently, again, to help educate the Pueblo community and Xcel Energy and Xcel's Energy and the General Atomics with Fort St. Vrain. I don't know if you know much about dear Fort St. Vrain. And
oh, I know a lot of that.
Oh yeah, there's tritium at Fort St. Vrain in their waste. That's why DOE is having to oversee Fort St. Vrain, Hanford, and Savannah River, because Idaho wouldn't take it. But the reason I needed you, Arnie, was what is this all about? When Colorado had to drink Rocky Flats as tritium, accident, they don't know how it happened. Well, and so 20,000 picocuries per liter of tritium's okay to drink. And then I have to read that the Xcel Energy, that's our state's energy group, right? They have a problem in Monticello nuclear power plant in Minnesota. And they're saying, it's just the pipes rusting underneath. Why would steel pipes be rusting? I had to read 42 nuclear power plants around the country, and even more, they're all leaking. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Well, what I wanted to bring to you is, we've got tritium as issue. I'm learning about the tritium. It's not funny because Fukushima is not going to release because of tritium. Pilgrim's not going to release because of tritium. People are beginning to question it. Why? You can't treat tritium. I loved it. So the reason I'm concerned is we're learning at Superfund sites, which I follow now, unfortunately, but it is fortunate. It's a great learning experience, that the EPA is not telling anyone, DOE is not telling anyone, DOD doesn't tell anyone. It's more than just the tritium they don't tell you they can't treat it, but it's so low, you don't need to worry, but you hit it. Do you know what cumulative risk is when you drink it, when you breathe it, whatever? They don't give you all of the elements. Just at Rocky Flats, you had radioactive, you have chemical, and you have heavy metals. And all they talk about is tritium. And I had someone tell me, and I'll close with this, well, Joan, you've got plutonium and it's a trigger and it's like a firecracker, which what tritium is. Well, we just found out they never even told us at Rocky Flats. Of course, they've had air releases that was confidential. But anyway, I wanted to hear what you had to say about tritium and why am I coming as an old lady now, 74? I'm going, what the hell do you mean? All these nukes are leaking tritium. Thanks.
Hey, I'm going to ask Tina, can you put up the link to the speech that I gave at Indian Point on tritium so that Joan and the other people on the chat here could tune in? So Joan,
I will.
Okay, I gave a extensive presentation at Indian Point on the issue of tritium, and we also, Maggie and I and a woman on our staff at the time interviewed the world's probably foremost expert on tritium, Ian Fairley, and that report is on the Fairwind site. It's about a 40-minute discussion with the three of us from Fairwinds and Ian in the UK. So there's a couple of resources rather than spend a lot of time talking about it. The resources are on the Fairwind site, Ian Fairley, and it looks like Tina's going to put up the link to the more recent presentation I gave at Indian Point.
Okay, well, thank you. And we did have to start late because of a Zoom bomb. So, and if we have no more questions, we should bring it to a close now because we've been here for an hour and a half or longer. So I think what I will do is, since nobody else has their hand up, I'm going to turn this back over to Dave to close the meeting. And I think the questions and answers have been just great. It's been a lovely time together.
Okay, well, thank you, Jan. I will take it from here then. Arnie, thank you so much for your opening your mind. That's what this Night with the Experts is supposed to be about. It's not about geekiness and PowerPoints, but experience and sharing the depth and wealth of that over time. I see we have a hand up, maybe one more question, and then I'll complete our closure for tonight. Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, let's see if I can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. You're
Oh,
good.
good. I put something in the chat on June 2nd, coming right up. The Radioactive Waste Committee, together with lots of other folks, are putting on a congressional briefing. We're inviting a number of the Congress people and their staff to this, and it's to address why nuclear can't help climate change, and we want to get their ear. And anyway, I put it in the chat. You can register. It's got help me on pronunciations. It's got anyway, I'll put that information in the chat. I don't know if everybody knows about that. Has it? Anyway, please pay attention, and I'll put the registration in the chat. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Stephen. And I would add to that, it's important that those of you on the call contact your congressional representatives' offices and your senators' offices and get them to attend this congressional briefing. That's the whole point of the exercise. And actually, even some reporters, if you know of any who are into this issue and could do a good job reporting on it, they would be welcome as well. All right.
Well, let me just say one more thing. We've been asked to announce that in June, at the last Thursday of June, we're going to be having Alfred Meyer come as our expert, and we're expecting him to talk about the fact that nuclear power is really just a cover for nuclear weapons, and that the War Department uses nuclear uses NPPs to gather, material for the so-called enhancement of our nuclear I'm at a loss for words. Our nuclear arsenal. That's the word I'm looking for. That the War Department uses nuclear power plants to get materials for the nuclear arsenal, particularly Watts Bar, which is absolutely contracted to the War Department for tritium. And they produce a lot of it and leak a lot of it in Tennessee.
All right, well, let's let Alfred talk about it next month, but you're all invited last Thursday of the month. Maggie, you have something you wanted to add? Go ahead.
Yes, I did want to say, I saw that when Stephen put that up, he also talked about Oliver Stone's new film. And Philip Carrillo, who is a filmmaker who was from LA and is now in the Pacific Islands, Pacific Islander, and is raising a family there. He has just put out a new documentary that features Arnie and I as two of the speakers about that very issue that Alfred's talking about also. And I can't find it. I tried to find the link quickly and I can't find it. I thank you all for having us, but I'll send you that link, Dave and Jen, so you guys can share that.
Yeah, we would share that. We will do that.
And thank you for hosting us today. We're a little disorganized given our getting ready to move. So thank you.
Good luck with that. We seem to have one more question. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Arnie, you had mentioned that the Navy was very much into the nuclear in the beginning, which means the Department of Defense has that been any kind of successful way to convince people that there is a definite connection between nuclear power and the need for the leftovers?
There's actually a quote. I'm not sure if it was a British prime minister or a French prime minister who said they need the nuclear power fleet so that when nuclear officers in the Navy retire, they have jobs to go to. So there's the professional cycle of people working in the nuclear navies of the world. It was either the Brits or the French, and I'm not sure which. When these guys retire out, it's important that they have. So some of these countries are keeping their nuclear power business alive to give jobs to retiring naval officers so they can keep their nuclear weapons program going. That's not exactly the material of uranium passing back and forth, but it's the mental acuity passing back and forth.
Okay.
I saw that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Stephanie, did you want to follow up on that? No. Okay. Go ahead, Arnie.
I in my career, I am not nuclear Navy. I went to a traditional engineering school. But we used to call the Navy guys ring knockers because they would take their Annapolis rings, and when they had enough of the argument, they'd start tapping their hand on the table and you hear clunk, clunk, clunk. So the Navy guys were called ring knockers because their Annapolis rings were rather large and rather noisy. Sorry.
That's what we mean about experience here. You got to share the experience. All right. So you have been invited to several things. We have Night with the Experts next month. Steve Sondheim mentioned the congressional briefing on the 2nd of June. And once again, I would want to say thank you very much to Arnie and Maggie for being with us tonight. Now, I invite you all to save the chat if you know how to do it. And it's very simple. You go to the bottom of the chat box. There's 3 little dots. You click the dots. It'll come up with a little pop-up that enables you to save the chat. So you can do it on your own, but if you can't master that, we always save it and we'll be happy to send it to anyone who asks for it. I'll also mention that this is being taped tonight. So as soon as we get the editing cleaned up, especially removing the Zoom bomb, we will make that available to the less prurient among you. So thank you very much for joining Night with the Experts. And again, thank you, Arnie and Maggie, for being with us.
Thank you.